For many San Diego homes, trash collection is free, but that may soon change. It's been nearly 3 years since voters narrowly passed Measure B to allow the city to consider charging a fee. Exactly how much? That's for officials to decide. The early estimates ranged from $23 to $29. Now that's more than doubled. The city can reduce the fee, but it would mean cutting additional services, things like new bins with microchips or more frequent recycling pickup. Officials could set aside less money in the reserves too. San Diego council members Sean Elo-Rivera and Joe LaCava both campaigned for the passage of Measure B. inewsource sat down with them to hear their takes on the fee estimates.
There are some things that are optional and there's others that aren't, right? So there are certain elements of service that we have a requirement per state law to provide. So I think that part's important to note. The regularity of service, there is some flexibility and policy decisions there, but this is not just like a completely free will, we're just making it up as we go sort of thing. The costs that are there all have to be justified, right? They all have to be accounted for. We're not able to charge any more than what we are providing. And we've done a cost of service analysis to ensure that we're appropriately costing what's there. So I think that what folks will see at the end is going to be lower than we've previously discussed, because the council's kind of provided that direction that we want it to be as affordable as possible while providing the services that people want. The other thing I think it's important to note about this, San Diego's not, we're not the outliers by recovering costs for trash. We are going to make ourselves come in conformance with the rest of the state and the country in recovering these costs. It's a typical practice, it's a best practice. We're solving for what was a really kind of egregious inequity in providing a free service to one portion of the city and not the other. So I think all of that is important context for what we're deciding.
Yeah, and I'll add, kind of going backwards to Measure B. Measure B was a very simple process to change what we've always called the People's Ordinance over 100 years ago that simply said the city will not charge for trash collection. And the conversation is, did we want to change that? And I was very honored to work with Councilmember Elo-Rivera to partner on that, on bringing that measure to the ballot that had that very simple question. And when I went out knocking on doors and talking to individuals and talking to organizations, I found that the groups fell into two different groups. One that said, we understand the equity component of it. I live in the city of San Diego, I'm a property owner, and I'm paying for trash service today from a private hauler, either because I live in a condominium or I live in a single family home on private streets. So why should I be paying for trash collection and the other half of San Diego is not? So that equity question really resonated with a lot of folks. The other half that said, hey, I pay already through property tax. Why should I pay an extra fee on top of that? And that's where the conversation lied. And I think that's what you saw on the votes in Measure B. Either folks supported the equity conversation, or I just don't want to pay an extra penny to the city of San Diego. And that's where the conversation ended. There certainly was some background information about what the fee could be, but we were not voting on a fee. Fast forward, once the city was ready to actually start that conversation, we created a pretty robust community outreach program. Now, some people pushed back on how much we spent with that, but we went out to the community, and as the council member said, what do you want out of this? We can add just the bare bones trash collection, recycling, organics, run the landfill, or we can provide extra services. And by and large, we started hearing folks going, oh, I would like this, and I would like bulky item pickup, and just kept listing more and more things that they wanted. So the department took all that into account and calculated what the fee could be. And when people saw how much that fee would amount to, they said, well, wait a minute, maybe I don't really need all those extra services. And as the council member said, now we're starting to kind of pull back what are really the core services that we want to be providing. And that'll be the conversation on June 9th, is what the staff recommendation is and where the council actually wants to lend for that affordability with just the mandatory services and a little bit to do a better job for a city of San Diego.
If I can just add one last thing, and Council President mentioned this. You said the rate that people voted on, and Council President addressed this. I think it's just super important to show people what the ballot question actually was. There wasn't a fee in the ballot question, and there wasn't a fee in the ballot question because in order to comply with state law and ensure that we were charging only what services were to be provided for, putting a fee in that question would have been, I don't even know how we would have done that in a way that would have been in conformance with state laws related to fees.
I understand that the actual fee amount was not in the ballot question. I was actually, I remember having a conversation with you a couple years ago on that, and asking you how you received criticism on the language of the question. One of the things that you said that, just to avoid rigidity against this ballot initiative is to make it in a way that, worded in a way that is would invite people to accept the fee. I understand that is, there's allowing the fee, a fee to happen versus the actual fee amount, but regardless, voters were presented with a fee estimate of $23 to $29 back in 2022, and now the IBA is explaining, that was based off of an inaccurate customer count, which is something that we did report on as well. They were aware of that, as well as other things not accounting for inflation. So, do you think that this is, what do you say to San Diegans who are upset about potentially feeling misled that they were sold a 23 to 29 fee range, and now it's more than double?
Well, I think to begin with, a lot of those folks, I suspect, voted no in the first place, did not like the idea of being extra charged, even though, as was stated, we're the last city, I believe, in the state of California that is not charging for trash collection and everything that goes along with that. And that's why there is a public process. We didn't certainly just announce one day, here's the fee, you're going to start getting a bill tomorrow. There is a very extended process that goes through that says, these are the actual services that we're talking about providing, and this is what the cost recovery is for that. There's a process for them to file a protest. That's what the period that we're in right now. And that's one of the reasons that we have one hearing. We actually had multiple hearings and outreach, but we had one hearing just to set a date. June 9th is that next opportunity for the public to explain, I don't like it or I do like it. If you lowered it, those are the range of conversations. They all have financial implications that the council will consider, but there still is that opportunity, and it is actually a very open process to describe. As the council member described, state law makes it very, very clear that we have to say these are exactly the services that we're talking about providing, and this is what the cost recovery is for that. And so it's very well regulated there. People may like it, they may not like it, but the question in front of us is what's the right amount of services and what's the cost recovery for that? And that's what you'll hear on June 9th.
And Crystal, I think the other thing I'd add, I understand why people want to know that all the background materials are accurate. And I wish they were. I think it's also really important for people to understand that the inaccuracy is a symptom of how broken the current system is. The system didn't have the resources to properly account for who was receiving service. There were people properties that were not supposed to be receiving the service they were taking advantage of this underfunded and under-resourced system, and that messed up the count. But it's a demonstration of just how broken things were, that we couldn't even keep track of who should be receiving the service and who wasn't. And I think that part's really important to drill down on, because there's properties across this city that I think the overwhelming majority of people would believe should pay for trash pickup. Airbnbs is an example. I have yet to meet the San Diegan who thinks that a property that's being used as a short-term vacation rental shouldn't be paying trash fees. We were not allowed to recover costs for that trash under the old rules. And what we did what we passed with Measure B allows for that. Mini dorms, properties that have been converted from a single family home to a relatively large condo or apartment complex but we're still receiving the trash services. So businesses that had maybe at one point in time been a single family parcel have become a business over time, but we're getting free trash pick from the city. It was kind of the Wild West, and it was not to the benefit of residents in the city of San Diego. The costs were going up. They were difficult to manage, if not impossible to manage, because of the old rules. So I think all of that context is super important. We can say at the same time, I wish that we were able to provide more accurate information, but I think there's a big difference between intentionally not having the most accurate numbers there and being unable to provide a precise count because of how broken the old system was.
I think that you make a really good point on, whether it was intentional or not. I don't think that's necessarily something that I'm personally critiquing. And in terms of the customer count, even now is one of the things that is being proposed is having microchips on the bins. Does that imply that even the current customer count is inaccurate and could then change again? I think that's, I don't know.
Well, I think that's a very good question. I think the depth of the analysis that's going into the cost of service study has really exposed that lack of understanding, as was described about. Right now, we sent the trucks out. If there's a black bin or a green bin or a blue bin, they just stop and they pick it up and they don't question, is that property really entitled? And the cost of service study has really forced us to really drill down and say, who exactly actually is entitled to get city services? Because the ordinance is very specific. You can't have any more than 4 dwelling units on the property. You have 5, you're not eligible. Your commercial property, you're not eligible. You live on a private street, or you're a condominium or an apartment complex, you're not eligible. And we didn't worry about that because, again, it was just part of the broader city services that were being delivered. Now that we're actually talking about reimagining that, we've really drilled down and we have a very hard and solid number of what that is. Is it going to go up by 5 or down by 10? Perhaps, but that's not going to affect what the overall perspective is. But I think we have a much better handle because of the effort over the past couple of years.
And the chips, Crystal, to be honest, the thing I think I pushed back most on in the initial proposal from staff was related to new bins. I was like,
You said it was related
to the new bins. Yeah, I said, help me explain how I can explain this to a constituent, especially if their bins are in good shape. We did write into the measure that people would get free bin replacement because that was something that folks wanted. They would get very frustrated that the city would break their bins and then they have to pay for replacement. So we wanted to make sure that folks knew that would be the case. So I said, help me explain this to folks. And I think there's some real merit to staff's desire to want to with 100% confidence say your trash was picked up, people are only paying for the service that is being received, and nobody who's not paying is receiving the service. So to make this legally defensible, they want it to be as certain as possible. And so it's still a thing that I'm wrestling with, but I think it's important to note why that's there. It's to give folks the certainty that they're not paying for free riders, right? And that we have a way of it's a quality control issue as well, right? We can say that the truck went to that property or it didn't go to that property with a different level of accuracy. We will be able to do that than we currently can today.
I think we all agree that it's been irresponsible to not pay for trash collection services.
Well, not all of us agree.
Yeah.
We agree.
Yeah. This was decades
Right.
in the making. I know y'all didn't do that. So having free trash collection services, what is being paid through debt financing. There we go.
Yeah.
So it's not a sustainable system to be paying for this service. Every other city that I know of has trash collection fees. I get the equity thing, but is it? I guess is it fair for current San Diegans to be the recipients of bad policy that they didn't sign up for?
Yeah, I think, well, no, that's why we're fixing it, right? So I think the way that this conversation is had, I think it's really interesting to me, right? Because and it's fair, the overwhelming focus is on folks who are currently receiving the service without charge and will be charged. And it's fair because it's going to have a financial impact on them. But it's important to note that every single San Diegan is being impacted by the status quo. That is a lot of money out of our general fund that is not being spent on parks, libraries, rec centers, fire stations, police officers, things that people want. And when they compare us to other cities and they say, infrastructure, right? Why does that city have those things and we can't? Well, part of it is because we were blowing an $80 million hole in our budget in completely novel way by having this system where half of San Diego was paying for trash and the other half wasn't. So I do think it's important to step back and focus on all San Diegans in this conversation. We can be very mindful of the impacts on people who will be charged this new fee, but that's not the entirety of the city. And so we are really, I'm trying to make decisions, speaking for myself, in the best interest of all San Diegans. And I think that moving forward with this fee is a way of doing that. So there's that piece. The second is we're not necessarily making up for, we're not trying to backfill. We're just trying to move forward in a better way. So no one's being penalized because of the failure to change this policy 10, 20, 30 years ago, unless we're thinking that there's a penalty, and there are costs associated with us not maintaining the system well over time. Like trucks as an example, like we've got more trucks to buy because we weren't able to pay for trucks as we went in the way that we might have in the past. So there is some catching up to do, but again, those costs were going to be borne by all San Diegans one way or another. We're just managing it in a much more responsible way now.
Yeah, and I'll add, you make a very good point. And one of the things I think about as a council member is that every day at the local, the state, the federal level, government is making changes. They don't ask the public, what do you think about this? You thumbs up or thumbs down. We're the elected officials. We're just going to make that changes. This question was so important that we had to go to the ballot to ask that very fundamental question: should the city consider charging an additional fee for trash collection? It was that important. That's probably the highest standard. The public gets the vote on that, and it did pass. Narrow, but it did pass at the ballot. And then the question of what the fee should be and what services should be provided also is so important that we actually have to engage the public directly in that conversation. And that is that Prop 218 process that is currently underway. Most of the stuff that impacts our quality of life, what we think our city should be or what we think our state, we don't get asked that as a member of the public. It gets decided for us. This was so important that we engage the public at the two critical stages going forward. And that's their opportunity to say, yes, I support this, B, I'm neutral, whatever you think is the best for the city as a whole, or C, I don't like it, I'm going to protest. So this is a very unique process for people to weigh in directly.
The San Diego City Council will vote on a trash fee amount on Monday, June 9th. That will also be the last day any eligible homeowner can submit their written protest.